So DFC actually is a fairly new government agency. It was founded based on, it was kind of an old agency that was refounded and merged with something else. And so it stands for the U.S. International Development Finance Corporation. And what we do is help promote development in terms of like growth in low and lower middle income countries by supporting the private sector. Because obviously USAID, which you may have heard of, is like the agency that does a lot of grants to various actors in developing countries, maybe for their health system or for agriculture or for various things. But we were founded really with the idea that by supporting private businesses or private projects, that can obviously help produce growth. And obviously the private sector is a big source of growth in developed countries. And so that's the thought that we're trying to do globally. And so then the DFC does a lot of different things, and that's like investing in making loans of anywhere from $1 million to $1 billion to projects or companies. It invests in funds. It writes insurance policies. And then I sit within kind of an unusual team that's focused on loans up to $50 million to companies in the food and agriculture sector. And so obviously food and agriculture has been a source of a lot of greenhouse gas emissions. If you look at the global numbers and maybe like 15-20% for the US. But it can also be part of the solution to climate change, both from a mitigations perspective and an adaptation. Because, I mean, inevitably, particularly some of the places that we work, like in South Asia or in sub-Saharan Africa, climate change is already happening, and it's dramatically impacting farmers that are often already, maybe not at a subsistence level, but are very marginal and they don't have a lot of reserves to fall back on. So a failed harvest really can be a catastrophe for them. And so in terms of integrating sustainability in everything we do, I mean, we have a agency-wide commitment to make, I think it's by 2030 to have a carbon neutral portfolio. Within even the food security unit that I'm in, we've committed to having 40% of our projects be climate linked, starting the fiscal year that begins in October. And I think the answer is that really we also are not even going to pursue anything that it has any harmful impacts. I mean, we don't have a prohibition on it, but we're not doing large scale livestock rearing projects because very few livestock projects are done in a sustainable way. Perhaps they exist, but that's part of the problem. So, I mean, one that I actually just returned from India on the diligence trip was a solar irrigation system. And they make actually two main products. It's essentially a computer that runs a solar powered irrigation system for farmers of varying sizes really throughout India, as well as, which is critical because that's a big adaptation play because only a marginal percentage of India's actually irrigated. And that means they're missing out on how many seasons of crops because they only get essentially one season if you're unirrigated. Whereas if you're irrigated, especially with the warm climate they have, they can get 2 or 3 crop cycles. So that's a big impact for both food security and for farmers that, like I said, generally are not wealthy people in India. And then the other product this company offers is a solar cold room, which is essentially like a big shipping container sized refrigerator outside with solar panels on the top that allows farmers that are growing tomatoes or other types of like produce because think about it, it's 80 degrees, 85 degrees. You leave tomato out for a day or two at 85 degrees, it's expiring pretty quickly. Whereas with these, they harvest, they put them into the rooms, and then they can either reach a market that's farther away, a lot fewer gets wasted. And so there's climate benefits, there's income benefits, and food security benefits.
What type of situations and projects like do you typically handle being like the associate director of like the food security unit?
Yeah, so we're actually there's 4 of us within the team, including the MD who manages everyone, and then it's really where each investment officer is leading individual deals, and
Got it.
so like I said, that solar project is one that I'm working on. I'm working on a grain storage. They're basically building big grain silos to promote long-term storage, which obviously has climate benefits too. That's another deal in India. Working on one on fertilizer in sub-Saharan Africa. And so it really, from start, what we do is really help source the projects and find promising projects in our sector. And like I said, hopefully they have climate linkages, and then really see it all the way from that origination side all the way through to making the loan. And so that means kind of having negotiations with the company, understanding their business, understanding their financials, making sure that they have a good business model and that they can make enough money to pay us back, because that's the other thing. Sure, we're using the government's money and we're making loans, and we're definitely not as expensive as going to a bank and getting a loan. But we're supposed to be like private sector, and therefore this isn't. We're not giving money away. We're supposed to get our money back, and so it's important that we find businesses that make sense and are sustainable. And so that's what a lot of us, like I said, us as investment officers are in charge of handling. And then it's just really just the administrative work. We hand it off to someone else to monitor it over the 3 or 5 or 10-year life of our loan.
Got it. That makes sense. How do you guys choose, like what projects to help to become more sustainable? Like, are there, like strategies that, like you use, or like are there certain things that you like look for in projects?
Yeah, so I mean, I think at a high level, I mean, even separately from sustainability, we, first of all, as I was saying, a big thing, and this is a word you hear a lot, is, I mean, firstly, it has to be in a country that we're comfortable with. I mean, we're not doing projects in Cuba, obviously. So it generally is countries that have at least not a hostile relationship with the United States. The other thing is that we require all of our projects in companies to conform to kind of best in class environmental and social standards. So no use of child labor, like having occupational health requirements, making sure people are using protective equipment if they're working in dangerous sites. And those are things that in the U.S. you take for granted because we have regulators and things check that. You know, in Ghana, that may not be obvious. And you walk around a construction site in India, not everyone has a hard hat on. Not everyone's wearing steel-toe boots. People are barefoot in some cases. And so that's just something that when we're coming in, we're definitely elevating the quality, both on like a social and health perspective, but then environmentally too. And so, I mean, we have dedicated environmental specialists, so we're more the commercial investment people. And then as part of the project team, there'll be an environmental risk officer and a social risk officer that will confirm that and question like the policies and procedures that the companies have to make sure that they have a policy for like wastewater treatment and how are they planning on disposing all of the waste? Are they recycling things? Where are they sourcing the materials from? What are their expected greenhouse gas emissions? And so I'd say that's a key like eligibility checklist. And then I think we also have other related programs to try to help companies after we've invested become more sustainable. And so what we call it is technical assistance, which basically will provide some extra like free money to the company to basically hire either a consultant to do an assessment and say, how can you, like maybe you can try to install solar panels on your roof. Like how could you do that? Or other sorts of ways to like increase the sustainability of a project or convert to organic farming or lessen the amount of inputs you're using, et cetera.
Got it. So when you're like investing in or like working towards making businesses and like projects more sustainable, like in that way that you're just explaining, are those projects that you've or like people that you've worked with like prior, or do you like search or does DFC like search for like ways to make those places like more sustainable by like giving actual money, not investing?
Well, yeah, so I would say that typically I would say that we only give the money, the grants tend to be for either investments that we've already made or for ones that we're about to make.
Got it.
So maybe it's a company that we really like and we think is interesting, but they need to do a little more on the sustainability. And so we'll give them some money essentially to do some of those environmental sustainability things. And then we'll hopefully move to an investment in 6 or 12 months. And I think the other thing I think is part of our investment, as I was alluding to, it often increases the sustainability too, because like I said, from their dialogue with the environmental risk person, they didn't have a policy on like waste disposal. And so they have to write one in order to pass our clearance process. And so that's promoting sustainability in that way. And I think to my point on like the barefooted construction workers, I think that's a good example of where just us being involved is like forcing our clients to kind of up their game a little. Definitely. And hopefully that's like precedent setting or at least example setting to like others in the industry locally so that they realize that, this is what like best in class is.
Definitely. That makes sense. Your website mentions working towards investing in projects to end world hunger and like build more sustainable food systems. What progress have you guys made towards working towards this goal? So
obviously ending world hunger is a very large goal.
Yeah, definitely.
Is worthy. I would say that our team was actually set up only, so the DFC has obviously invested in food and agriculture in the past, but it's typically been a very small, like anywhere from like 1% to 4% of the portfolio, so very small numbers. But our team was set up 2.5 years ago now, with support from USAID, who wanted DFC to do more in food security. And fortunately, our percentage of the total portfolio has grown a lot, and we have done a lot. So I think the last couple of years, we may have even been like 8 or maybe even 10% of the portfolio in terms of related to food security. So the numbers have increased a lot. I think building a sustainable food system takes time, and I think in terms of various buckets, because the sustainable food system obviously requires farmers. Because it's one thing in the U.S. where you have big, like monoculture farms and big agribusiness, that has a place in the U.S. In most of the low income or lower middle income countries that we work in, farmers tend to be farming like a few acres. Like in India, most of the farms we were seeing was essentially 1 acre, which growing up in suburban South Carolina, like that was basically my front and backyard put together.
Yeah.
Like that was all I'd be farming, which is kind of crazy to think about. And so to have a sustainable food system, you also need farmers that have enough to at least feed their families and make some money, but they also need to have resources to invest in better inputs and fertilizers and have ways to access markets so that they can sell their products and not have and to reduce spoilage along the chain. And so unfortunately, because our loans tend to be on the larger side, we aren't generally lending directly to farmers, but we try to find other places kind of in that farm to fork chain that can help from us. And so that's why it tends to be, like I said, we were looking at a produce market in Zambia. And by using this produce market, it was like reducing commissions and allowing farmers to access markets and reducing spoilage, because it was a big modern market as opposed to people selling tomatoes out in the sun outdoors. And so I think those are all, everything we do is hopefully increasing food security, but I would say reducing food loss and waste is one of the easier wins, just because there's, anywhere, and I think even in the US, I think it's something like a third of food is wasted. And in some of these countries, I think even in India, I saw was something like 50-60%.
Wow.
And that's anywhere from, like I said, from harvest all the way to your plate. But there's a lot of that is lost early on because, like I said, improper storage or cold chain issues, et cetera.
Got it. What are some of the risks involved with investing in these projects, and like what are some of the strategies that like you take to help ensure like success?
So I think that one of the key risks when it comes to this agriculture generally is that it's a volatile market. I mean, as you can see, just from prices of food moves around a lot, and so like in the war in Ukraine is obviously a big factor in that. And so grain prices spiked a lot, fertilizer prices spiked a lot, and so then farmers were getting squeezed because they can't sell the grain that they're going to produce for 6 more months, but then they can't afford to buy as much fertilizer, so they're going to use less, and then their yields are going to go down. So that, I think, mitigating the just inherent agricultural price risk and yield risk and anything, biological assets. I mean, we also did a fish farm actually in Mozambique last year, and similarly, they've had issues with, maybe there's been too much sediment in the water, so the fish didn't grow as fast as expected, and whenever you're, like I said, you're dealing with something biological, that's a risk. So that's one of the key risks. And I think that like I said, that's the first thing that comes to mind. I think the other thing is they tend to be achieving scale can be challenged. For instance, anything that's like tech related, it's very easy. Once you've made a product, it's very easy to make 100,000 versions of that. Whereas when you're talking about interventions, like maybe you're selling fertilizer to farmers or you're connecting individual farmers to better markets, it's a lot tougher to reach the number of farmers. And so I think that achieving, like I said, that scale to build a profitable, sustainable business is also tough in farming, particularly when farmers are generally they're constant risk managers, and it's very difficult for them to want to take a risk on something new, particularly when they haven't necessarily had like a formal education in best farming practices. They're doing things the ways that they've been told to do it. It's worked well enough, and this newfangled idea may not necessarily pan out, and they can't afford to take that risk. So I think those are some of the key challenges, at least in terms of the places that we work.
Got it. That makes sense. This is definitely more of a personal question, but what do you think the most meaningful project like you've worked on is? Like, has anything like stood out to you? Any specific projects?
That is an interesting question. What did I work on last year? I think the fish farm in Mozambique was actually, I would say, would probably be it. It was actually the smallest loan I worked on. It was only $3.5 million roughly. But this they're raising fish, and I hear fish farm as an environmentalist. You hear fish farm and think bad things. They're doing, like I said, best in practice, and they're raising tilapia in this rural part of Mozambique that is extremely poor. Driving through there, people are living in mud huts on the drive into the farm, and what they're doing is really helping to provide low-cost protein to their surrounding areas, not to mention the employment benefits and et cetera. And so I found that to be just a really meaningful project, both because of first of all, it was eye-opening because to learn that fish farming can be done well versus like the Patagonia documentary about how bad fish farming is. But then also in terms of the food security benefits for the local region that is in really a great need for, like, is it low-cost protein. Got it.
Were you involved with sustainability, like, at all at Lawrenceville? And, like, totally fine if not, but, like, what inspired you to, like, want to have a career, like, involved with, making more projects sustainable?
So I definitely was involved with sustainability at Lawrenceville, but I'm actually reflecting now. I'm not even sure there was a sustainability council in the same way. So like I said, I'm trying to think what precisely I did other than like move things to the recycling bin constantly. But I think so I was definitely, I've been a Boy Scout actually before Lawrenceville. And so and the environment has always been very important to me. And so and after graduating Lawrenceville, I went to Chapel Hill and then at Goldman Sachs, and so kind of did more of a private sector career. And actually, my last few years at Goldman, we did a few project financings on big renewable power projects. We did a few offshore wind farms or outside in the United Kingdom. We did a solar project in Spain, and that actually was what really piqued my interest in the career of kind of this green finance side. And so I was like, wow, there's actually something to do here. And so that's why I went back to grad school at Columbia for public policy, focusing on energy and environmental policy. And so, well, like I said, I knew a high level amount from work and just from being interested in reading the paper. That's where I'd say that I really kind of did a deep dive into what electricity markets are like. What does sustainability mean? What's like environmental economics is a whole field I didn't even know about. My current job is food and agriculture, which isn't energy and environmental policy, but agriculture is critical for the climate. Like I said at the beginning, with the link to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions.
Got it. After graduate school, did you like work your way towards the like current position that you hold, or like were there other like companies or projects or just like jobs that you worked at that like led to you being
so as you maybe saw from LinkedIn, it's like I actually was at the Department of Energy for like 3 months. I graduated grad school and wanted a job rather than be unemployed, so I started there actually in an interrelated team. It's called the Loan Programs Office, and they make loans to emissions reducing energy projects. So obviously right square in the middle of sustainability, and it's actually a very interesting team that with all the legislation is getting more and more funding to do things. And so, but I was interested in doing something more international focused. And so that's why I moved to DFC. So I wouldn't say that was necessarily a stepping stone, but it basically proves that I was interested in doing something in sustainability, just trying to find the right thing.
Got it. That makes sense. Are you in charge of like handling international projects, or are there like projects within the U.S.?
So we don't actually, DFC does not do anything in the United States. Okay. That's a restriction. Whereas interestingly, LPO, the DOE job that I had before, they're actually exclusively United States. They're a little different.
Got it. I think most of the questions that I had left kind of fell into what you explained, just about the transition between Lawrenceville and your current job, and like if anything at Lawrenceville influenced your path. But unless there's anything else you want to mention, I think that's all of the questions that I have for you.
No, I mean, I guess just to put the cherry on top for Lawrenceville. I mean, I think that, hey, you said you're a junior or a senior?
Yeah, I'm a junior.
I mean, hey, I think that the school does a good job, or did, and I'm sure it's even more so now, of really, I think, providing perspective on both the kind of global events and global issues, both in school and even having sustainability events and the like. And so I think that all of that was obviously critical in further informing my understanding. I mean, even that, like, I actually had Mr. Laubach on for my freshman science class, I think maybe 2 of the 3 trimesters, if not all 3. And like that was I remember reading Sand County Almanac for his class, and like those kind of things I think were my first exposure to ecology and these type of, so I was always, like I said, I went hiking, I was interested in the outdoors, but this was definitely was my first exposure to it more in a scientific context, and let alone like environmental protection, which obviously the school takes very seriously, and frankly was actually getting, I think, bigger while I was there, and I'm sure like the Green Cup where they used to compete against different schools, like that I think started while I was there, whereas I think now, if it's still going on, I'm sure it's much more formalized.
Got it. Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time to tell me about your job and how you got from Lawrenceville to there, and about all the projects, and this was all really helpful, so thank you.